What?
Okay. Hi, Lisa. Hi, Caroline. And Terry's there somewhere. I see his name. So I think Christina, I don't see Christina. I think Christina's. I think Christina's the only one. Linda, Todd, Barry, Doug, Jan, yeah. Okay, and it looks like Christina's the only one not with us right now. And I'm going to, I'm not sure if I have her cell phone in here. Ew. Okay. Well, I've just texted Christina, and I can't, she might have been one of the ones that said that this evening didn't work for her. So we'll go ahead and just get started and say good evening to everyone. It's been a while since we've gathered together, so it's good to see all of you. And I appreciate you carving out time for us tonight. We'll try to get through as quickly as we can. We do have a fair amount to cover. And before we go any further, though, I would just like to offer a prayer for our time together, if you would pray with me. Loving Creator, we come to you at this time in gratitude for this opportunity to gather together, to conduct the business of the Mission Center that needs to be done, keeping in mind that all those business decisions and analyses and hard conversations that we sometimes have to have are all for the same purpose, and that is to bring your kingdom to this part of the world and to represent you and to spread your message where we can. So we ask your blessing on us as we gather, that we might be open to all of the possibilities before us, and that everything we do might be done as a form of gratitude for the blessings that you have given us and encouragement for the work that is ahead of us. So we ask your blessing on us tonight, we pray in the name of your Son, Jesus Christ. Amen. Oh, and there she is. Hi, Christina. So thank you all for joining us tonight again. I wanted to, for those of you who just joined, I just wanted to say again, thank you to Doug Brown, who is being on this meeting tonight, 3 days before his wedding. So we're grateful for squeezing us in to your schedule, and hope that you've all had a wonderful summer thus far. It's been kind of crazy with weird temperatures down here. I don't know if Lisa and Laura have experienced unusually warm temperatures up in Alaska, but it looks beautiful wherever you are, Laura. So I hope you all are experiencing a good summer in that regard.
I'm outside because it's not raining.
Yay. Yay. Well, thanks again for being here. For the new members of our group, I just wanted to share that typically the summer meeting that we have for Mission Center Council generally focuses on the proposed budget and conference planning for those things that are going to be coming up at Mission Center Conference in November. And the budget being the primary one that we need and want to run by all of you and get your feedback and input and support for. So we will be presenting quite a few documents this evening and proposals. And what I will just say now, but probably repeat at some point in the meeting, is that what we're presenting to you right now are drafts. And our conversation tonight may certainly yield some revisions of those documents. And so all of that will make more sense as we start going through them. But primarily, we want to get your feedback on the drafts that we have now. And then as we move into the next several weeks, whatever might need to be revised or adjusted, we'll probably conduct most of that through email and just sending out revised or final versions. If it looks like by the end of this meeting that we actually would have a lot to review and it might be more productive to schedule another meeting in a few weeks, very briefly, just to review any edits to the topics that we're going to discuss tonight, then we can talk about doing that later this evening. But at this point, everything that we're presenting to you is a draft and open to your feedback and input as far as revisions. So with that, I'm going to try to follow the actual budget that I sent you, and I should look at that.
You mean agenda?
Yeah, what did I say? Budget?
Budget.
Yeah, well, that's on the agenda. Which is next, actually, and Donald. So with that, I am going to turn most of this meeting over to Donald because it is primarily budget-based and all things related to finances. So I'm going to turn it over to him and mute myself, and then we will continue on through the discussion. So thank you.
Okay. So first of all, I'm going to take a little bit of liberty and change the agenda just a little bit, Kim, because I want to go backwards and explain. Excuse me, I hear people screaming on my TV downstairs. Okay. Explain a process that I've been in contact with the leadership team about for about 9 months, and about how we do allocations. And I wanted to bring that up first because it will inform a lot of the decisions that I made for writing the budget. So one of the documents that I sent you early this morning, and I don't expect that you have read it because I didn't give you tons of advance notice, has to do with allocation models. Now, every mission center that I've been a part of prior to coming to Pacific Northwest has moved away from the allocation model, whereas there's a formula that is used to determine what each congregation owes to the mission center. And they moved away from that in parallel with the world churches move away from their tithing being a hard 10% and moved towards a person's more, the term being your true capacity. And they moved towards a generosity model. Well, back in January, or maybe it was November last year, I talked to the leadership team about how when I'm doing my job, I like to keep up with my day-to-day tasks, but I also like to have one project that I'm working on long-term. And this time I wanted to focus on changing the allocation model so that congregations have more input about how much they believe they can afford to send to the mission center, and it being more in line with our denominations, ideas about what generosity really is. So back and forth, Kim and Sean and Ashley and Jill and I have tweaked this to a degree, saying that, okay, we want to move towards a generosity model, but we want to do it in a couple of phases. So, and in a couple of different ways. So I'm going to share my screen with you to show you what we came up with. Let's see, it's been a while. Share screen. Okay, do you see a very colorful spreadsheet in front of you? Somebody say yes, because I can't see very many of you once I do this. Okay,
Yes.
great, thank you. So over here, I've tracked over the past last year and this year what people were allocated and which congregations gave an additional amount through congregational generosity. You can see from year to year, it varies a little bit, but not a lot, as long as we're doing business as normal. In 2022, which is the budget we are about to suggest or propose, what I've done is taken in column K a straight 10% decrease of everybody's allocation and thrown the formula out the window for 1 year only because of what we want to do in 2023. I've had many congregations come to me and say we need to lower our allocation because we can't afford it. And because of the financial situation that we happen to be in 2022 and 2023, this is a perfect year to do this. And so I've used these numbers and, I've forecasted based on the history of their congregational generosity also to come up with these numbers right here on the bottom, and they're plugged into the income portion of the 2022 proposed budget, which I'll go there in just a second. Also at conference, at the same time, or I don't know if it'll be before or after the budget, we are going to talk about a resolution about switching in the 2023 year into this new generosity model for allocations. What we've decided as a leadership team is that there really should be a minimum amount that you should be able to afford in order to be a congregation in one level or another. And so you can see that most of those congregations, we believe that minimum level is $1,500. But there are a few congregations that you can see, especially Mossy Rock. That's the one that is the easiest to see, that 1,500 would have been a very high increase over their last allocations. So we decided to do some tiers. We did a $500 tier and a $1,000 tier for these congregations, and this one down here, and that those ones wouldn't have any suggested donations on top of that. Row Q, or column Q, excuse me, would be suggested donations from the Mission Center, where congregations can respond and can tell us if that reflects their true capacity or not. We know that in some cases it may not, it may be too high. I happen to know, or at least I believe, that in some cases it's too low. And so these are conversations that I want to have with each of the congregational leadership team prior to instituting this in 2023, if, of course, the resolution to move this direction passes. And so when I show you the budget this year, we're going to be primarily focusing on 2022, but I do have a 2023 budget off on the far right-hand side that we can discuss also, except the fact, that 2 years out, the forecasts are a little bit woogier than they are 1 year out. So are there any questions about this spreadsheet and that move before we go back and we talk about the budget? Do you think it's a good change? I'd like to hear your opinions.
This is maybe a very basic question, but I want to make sure I get it right. I spent a lot of time in the car today, so my brain's a little shot. So the first column for the current, like the 2021 and 2022, that first column is just what it says allocation. That's currently what the allocations are. And then in the second column where it says generosity, that's currently above the allocation amount that those congregations are giving, or
Yes.
you expect them to based on past practice? Okay.
That's correct. Some congregations recognize the fact that they have these really large contract leases with outside groups that bring them in a lot of money. Some congregations have very large, proportionately investment pools, and they have decided to give more than we have been allocating them.
I confess, I have not had a chance to read the allocation models paper as to the thing going through.
Mhm.
But I'm curious as to the thought process behind changing. I mean, I get that there were formulas and we've tweaked those and factors change. Is this, but the amounts look to be relatively the same, or in totals. Is this so that we can feel more generous as congregations, or is this, I mean, do we think there's going to be a fall off in terms of meeting the allocation plus
pull it back.
generosity in
Yeah.
terms of?
Let me pull it back up here. Yeah, there's some nuances that I see that you're getting at. So yeah, their totals over here, by and large, do generally follow the amounts that they had the previous year. But in most cases, they are actually far less than they have been in previous years. So these suggested donations here in this column, or sorry, in this column, are really intended to be a discussion point between me and the pastors and CFO. They are mostly in line with what they're going to be allocated for 2022, but they are decreased significantly over 2021 and 2020. And I'll explain a little bit more about why that is later. Basically, we are in an extremely strong financial position based on our earnings over the last 2 years. 2019 and 2020 combined, we earned $1 million in interest in the Mission Center.
Okay.
Okay, so that's, you know, why I think that this is a really good time to be doing this. And yes, I do expect some fall off from this category in this column. I expect this to be somewhat lower, although I do expect that there might be a few congregations that will increase their generosity after I have these conversations with them. So it is indeed a little bit messier than the allocation formulas, because I have to have these conversations, one with each and every single one of the congregations prior to Mission Center conferences. And some of our congregations don't have their budget meetings when they should. Some of them have them after Mission Center conference, and some of them have them after the beginning of the year, when that one particularly makes me want to strangle people. But yeah, so this is going to be hopefully gearing our congregations up and training them to, in the future, try to have their business meetings. Let's do it by October, folks. Let's have these by October so that you can be able to tell the Mission Center before its conference what its hard numbers are going to be. Can I stop sharing this now, or do you want to keep staring at it for a little bit? Okay. Any other questions, comments, concerns about that model? Yeah, Kim?
I just want to add, you know, I've only been Mission Center president for 4.5 years, but I worked for the Mission Center since 2009 in another capacity where I was still aware of what was happening. And I'm just aware that over all of those years, year after year, we see more and more congregations struggling to meet their allocation because of diminishing size, fewer contributors, more people moving into those fixed income retirement levels. And I have sensed, and maybe I'm off, but in both of the roles that I've worked for the Mission Center, I have sensed in many cases a sort of resentment by many congregations for this allocation or assessment, as many of them like to call it. And because we have talked for a long time in the whole world church, as well as in our Mission Center, about true capacity and living out of a generosity model rather than an obligation or requirement model. And this is one way of taking a risk, but also showing that we have faith in our people by moving into this generosity model and hoping that folks see that we are trying to lessen the burden while at the same time encourage that generosity. So yes, there's some risk involved in moving to this model. Absolutely. I would hope that if this proposal meets with your approval and we ultimately do present it to Mission Center Conference, I would hope that folks understand that we're willing to take that risk in order to lessen the burden on the congregations and then rise to that challenge of living out of a model of generosity rather than obligation. So I just wanted to share that from a kind of upper level perspective in terms of overall feelings about that allocation model as it's been.
I see your hand, Christina, go ahead.
I just want, you talked about how the Mission Center is pretty secure and can take that risk. I want to make sure that that means secure enough that none of the paid employees of the Mission Center would be put in jeopardy mid-year. I've seen that from the municipal government side when things tank and then you have layoffs and how that affects people. And so just make sure that by security, we mean secure enough that people who are paid by the Mission Center don't risk.
No,
made insecure by it.
we definitely don't have a risk of laying off people
Okay.
right now. Yeah. And I'll demonstrate that in the other budget as well. In the budget.
Okay, and I didn't have time to look over. I read the Word
Yeah.
document, but didn't have time to look at numbers.
Yeah,
earlier, so I
we'll get there.
apologize. That was pretty clear in the other stuff.
Yeah, we'll
And
get there. That's okay. Somebody else raised their hand, but it
Oh,
went away.
the-
I didn't see
Todd.
it.
I also just wanted
Oh.
to say I like the idea of a generosity model, and I like the idea of giving a suggested amount of donation, because at least in my personal giving, that's something I sort of struggle with. And so knowing, tithing is, even though we don't use a strict tithing number, like having that as a ballpark so that I can kind of having something to anchor myself against and thinking about what's appropriate and what should I be aiming for and what's a goal is helpful to me. So I like the generosity model with a suggested amount.
I'm kind of hoping that it creates a kind of friendly competition between how generous congregations can be. So I don't know if that'll happen or not, but
I have a question.
sure, Todd.
So I see how you derived the suggested generosity for this coming year. How are you going to be doing it going forward? Is it based on what the generosity was the year previous?
Gosh, in the experiences that I've had at the other mission centers I talked to, that is how they did it. But I would like to be a little bit more sophisticated about that. I think perhaps seeking some feedback from each of our congregations to say, how has your financial situation changed this year? And maybe having a conversation with them. What do you think the suggested, because they could have new leases, they could have, windfalls. And I think that I'd like to keep track of that. So yeah, I don't have a formula going forward, but that's a very good question, Todd, and I'm going to write that one down.
I think having a target number is a great idea, because otherwise if people set their own targets, chances are it's going to be lower. So
Yeah.
I think probably too, and I'm glad Todd you raised this because I think there is some justification, I guess, in my mind, and I haven't even talked to Donald about this. But I would say that there's some reasonable justification in, once if we pass this, or if we decide to do this using this model, then getting past 2023, I think at that point it's fair to have conversations with pastors and CFOs about what their AIP balances are, what their operating budget is versus what their savings are, and what would be a fair amount, and maybe work with them rather than us setting a targeted generosity amount. A little more interaction maybe between the leadership team and the congregations to determine what we can all agree would be a fair target, not because if we get too regimented about it, then it just becomes an allocation again. So we don't want to see that happen. But I think there should be some dialogue, and the congregations should have some input into how those targets are derived.
Okay, if we don't have any more comments or suggestions about this, it sounds like I'm going to take your questions as probing. They don't seem to be counter. Mostly you guys seem to be in favor of the situation. Carolyn, you unmuted for a purpose, I think.
I did. I want to ask the really ugly, awkward question. Based on absolutely no inside information, and I could be wildly inaccurate. My memory of years and years and years past is that sometimes there can be congregations that don't want to close because they don't want to close, as they're dwindling and dwindling and dwindling, and the inability to make an allocation had sort of been a thing that triggers the more difficult conversation and the more about, and I know that can also then breed resentment to the mission center. Well, the mission center is closing us, or way back, the stake is closing us because we couldn't come up with this. Is moving to this model, and I don't know on your end when you guys trigger conversations with congregations about such a thing, is this removing a tool or a benchmark or something that can trigger a hard but necessary conversation, or am I just wildly off here?
Well, finances certainly, I'll let Kim, finish this one, but finances certainly play a part when it comes to decisions about congregations closing. But, we've seen congregations decide to sell their buildings without closing, and greatly reduce their overheads. If I were to be honest, I think that when a congregation closes, usually stems more from a leadership perspective than it does from financial, because we've just run out of people who want to be pastor and CFO. But that being said, there are a couple of congregations who are running out of money. I will say that very plainly.
Yeah.
Do you have anything to add there,
Yeah.
Kim?
And actually you said, pretty much what I was going to say is that normally the situation we're seeing right now with many of our congregations is more an issue of lack of succession planning. And it concerns me greatly the number of congregations we have in our mission center where the pastor is only serving as the pastor because no one else will do it. And that is not a healthy congregation. And so as you're aware, we're having these discernment journey conversations with pastors. And that is one of the things that has been coming up is, asking fairly blunt questions about succession planning and where is your passion as a pastor? And so we have lots of congregations who are in basically pretty good financial shape. But as Donald said, just don't have the leadership, the cadre of folks willing to step into leadership roles. And that has been the biggest challenge lately, which is very unfortunate. And yes, we have some congregations that are absolutely not on good financial footing and have some challenges ahead in that regard. I feel like for the most part, financial struggles are easier to resolve and to address because it's a tangible thing. You can say, you don't have enough money. Leadership struggles are a little different because it's very personal, and you start talking about, people's capacity and wit, and no one wants to say, I'm burnt out, I'm done, I don't want to do this anymore because it's too hard. Nobody wants to say that to me. But I know there's folks out there that feel that way. So that's part of our challenge in a different regard. But as far as what you're asking, Carolyn, we're hoping that this model would actually lessen the financial burden and allow congregations to even contemplate generosity. Some of them, I think, feel so burdened by their allocation, and it's such a struggle to meet that allocation that they just don't even have the capacity to think beyond meeting their allocation and their utilities and their actual operating expenses. And so if we can lessen that burden on one side and free up their opportunity to talk about generosity and even to consider, what they could do from a generous standpoint rather than an obligatory one, I think that can enhance the health of an otherwise struggling congregation. And I may have just generated more questions than answers right there.
I think just with more time, I had more questions. One question I have is if the new model for 2023, will the Mission Center Conference be voting on the suggested generosity amounts or just on the allocation amounts?
I think
Like
we'll
how
just-
transparent will those suggested donations be?
We have yet to write that resolution, but it'll be considered at this conference.
Right.
We'll be sure to send it to you guys in draft form to get your feedback about that. Because it's best to have it, the whole plan laid out. Right. I mean, you guys, we can just say, hey, trust us, we're going to go to an allocations model, but that might not be the best resolution ever.
I think in each year, my question is more like in each year that the smaller allocation and then the suggested amount is done. And maybe you just don't have the answer to that yet, or I'm missing it. But I think it would be good to have everybody. I think it would be good for the Mission Center as a whole to sort of approve the suggested donation so that it's transparent and people. I think it helps with that level of fairness in a way.
I think, Christina, if I can just jump in here, and again, the questions that you're raising, Donald and I are hearing for the first time, so we haven't even, been able to really discuss them, but they're really good questions. I would suggest that if we go with this model, then down the road in the future, or as we're explaining it, maybe would be a better time, as we're explaining it to folks, we point out and highlight that the combination of the allocation, the lowered allocation, and the suggested generosity amount will generally reflect previous year's allocations, so that people have in mind already. People have known what other congregations' allocations have been. It's always published. So people would have a general idea that the suggested donation for Eugene or Crystal Springs or Woodland Park might be substantially different than the suggested generosity for Mossy Rock or Myrtle Point or Neilton, for example. So people could assume that. I'm not sure. I would want to think about actually publishing what our suggested donation is. I am always worried about a congregation feeling shamed or pressure if for whatever reason they were not able to meet that target or that goal. Because
I have
then
a
to
que-
me, it starts feeling like it's just another way of saying that's your
Yeah.
allocation.
I have a procedural clarification, and then I see
And I
Todd
know
with his
Todd's
hand up.
hand, yeah.
Yeah. When we pass this resolution at conference, it will include, what it will include is amending our operating guidelines. And currently the allocation formula is laid out in the operating guidelines. And so you should expect to see similar language about a precise modification to that guiding document. Todd?
So I think to get away from the individual generosity expectation to be, a public knowledge, is we have two numbers, a number that says this is how much our allocations are going to be are going to total, and then another number that says this is how much generosity we're going to need from everybody as a public thing. And then individually, we have a suggested generosity for each congregation.
Yeah, and that's precisely how it's going to be laid out in the budget that I'm going to
Okay.
share with you. Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense. I think one thing I'm thinking about is if some way to make the process for suggesting a donation amount transparent, even if the donation amount isn't, so that it's not like, well, your mission center doesn't like X congregation, and so you're suggesting your suggestion is now more like just another way to fall in that trap of, well, you suggested they donate a lot less than you suggested we donate. So maybe that's just sort of publishing the factor, some way to publicizing the factors that you talk to CFOs about, or guidelines, even if it's not, or things congregations could think about, like what should congregations think about in terms of their generosity, but just some way to sort of almost, and maybe I'm being too legalistic here, but while creating space for generosity, still show there's fairness and equity in the way people are asked to consider being generous, if that makes sense.
That makes perfect sense. I mean, I could actually see coming up with some standardized, questions to ask at the end of each year. So, all right, are we ready to move to the budget? Good times. Okay. All right, here we are. The scope of this conversation, we are first going to deal with column H, which is the 2022 budget. Everything that we have been talking about allocations is actually over here in the L column. This column will not be presented to the conference this year because we have to talk about that resolution first. But for your information, I wanted to put it over here so that you'd see what it looks like. So first, let's just deal with the short term, future. I had already discussed with you how this number for congregational allocations in this year of transition is just a straight 10% cut across the board for all allocations. Now, why is that? Why? Because we don't need the money this year. This was the operating surplus that was left over from COVID from 2020. Even after we gave $70,000 of extra emergency funds away, we still had $63,000 remaining in our 2020 operating budget, which is also, and with the increase of our interest here in this box, 4% of our operating investment fund is about $10,000 more than it was last year. And because that number and this number were so large, we don't need to take a whole lot of extra money from our AIP next year. This number is only approximately 1%. Actually, it's under 1% of additional draw, which finally gets us close to the 4% that we're supposed to be at. The Bend loan is still with us and is going to be with us for 2 more years. We are under contract for a sale for that building, and you can ask questions about that at the end of the meeting if you'd like. The sale date is 2 years down the road, although it could be less, it could be about 18 months. And then the rest of the money is taken pretty much, rest of the income budgets is taken pretty much carte blanche from the years before. Down here on expenses. Ministerial staff will not cost us nearly what I expected it would be in 2021. And that's because we finally have the hard numbers to compare with last year about the changes to our human resources packages. We were able to offer better insurance for less money. How much less? About $24,000 less. So it will not cost as much to employ people for the Mission Center. Hence, answering some of Christina's questions, you can say employ the same people cheaper in the coming few years before inflationary forces force it up, of course, over the next 5 years, I'm sure. So there's that. This number here is assuming we're not in the pandemic next year. Or in 2022, we'll see how that goes. Alaska Ministry, I threw in a $500 raise because our Alaska minister has been doing the same work for the past 5 years for the same amount of money. I did not discuss that with anybody except our leadership team. Nobody asked for that raise, but I thought that it might be nice to put in there. The vehicle reserve, we had discussed last year that perhaps $900 a month is probably more than we need in the vehicle reserve. And in the long term, I agree with that. But in the short term, I left it at the same amount because Kim's car is due to be replaced in a year's time, approximately, depending on how much driving we do. And until that car is replaced, I don't feel comfortable lowering that number by a significant amount. Let's see. So that's our total. Oh, and the same deduction from years ago, from last year, applies to our support staff because they're part of the same benefits package that the ministerial staff is. Let's see. The rest of these numbers are based off of previous expenditures, and I don't have much to say about them. Sean did not ask for increases anywhere. Jody did ask for an increase in Caravan, but she hasn't had Caravan for 2 years, so I decided not to give it to her. Let's see. Yeah, that's about it. I don't have any more notes to share with you. Okay, so let's field questions about 2022 before we talk about the impact of 2023. Oh, I have to stop it. This has been a problem with Kim and I. Hold on, I think I just solved it, Kim. I'm trying to see how to see all of you even while I'm sharing the screen, and I just figured it out.
Yeah,
so I can see all of you now. Okay.
Yeah.
Does anybody have any questions or changes that they'd like to see made?
I just wanted to add, in case there's any questions about my car, it might feel awkward to question why it might be time to replace my car. So I will just share. I have a 2015 Subaru that Kathy Sharp purchased her last year of being Mission Center president. It's got about 110,000 miles on it right now. And normally in the World Church fleet of cars, when you reach 120,000 miles, they replace it. And so we're kind of following that same model. Had we not had the pandemic, I would have probably reached my 120,000 by last December. And right now, as I said, I'm only at about 109, 110,000. So that's just to give you some context as to Donald's comment about ultimately replacing my car. If this year continues the way it is, and I'm not doing much traveling, it may take well into 2022 before I get even close to the 120,000. So I just wanted to share that just so you kind of have a frame of reference as to how the car replacement
Oh,
policy
and
works.
also I floated this with Kim. It's important that we have a complete vehicle policy in place before we do any of this. And we do intend to have that in place before we take any action on that. And we'll be discussing that with you guys too at some future meeting. So,
So Don, about the caravan, I know they're planning to go to Hawaii, maybe.
mhm.
Is there a reason you just maybe felt that they weren't gonna have, the chances are that they're not gonna have it, and that's why you didn't want to increase it, or?
No, I
Um,
didn't increase it because they've had 2 years of fundraisers and no expenditures. So
Oh, okay.
Caravan has $44,000 in the bank right now. And I didn't feel that they needed additional help beyond what's budgeted
I
for
see, okay,
2022.
that makes sense.
Yeah, they've done really well in the past 2 years, even without camps, because their fundraisers are bringing in 15 grand, and every time they do it. So people are still supporting the program, even though they're not going out. We are definitely hoping that they spend a good chunk of it and actually make it to Hawaii this year. So, and they'll spend like they always do. They spend our $4,600 first before they dip into their fund.
Of course.
I had a quick question about copies and printing. I see that it's gone down quite a bit from 2020, and then you have it a little higher in 2023. I'm assuming the going down is because of the Chinook not being printed.
Oh, you know what? I think I corrected it in the wrong column. I had over here in my notes compared to 2019 after our last leadership team meeting. And I opened the 2019 actuals and it was closer to 4,000. I was supposed to change that in both categories. 400, 4,000. We spent more like 4,000. And the reason that it's so much less than it was this year, because this is the last year we published the Chinook in paper. So, pretty much half of this budget here and this one also postage.
We also saved money. We also saved a lot of money because we were not printing Mission Center conference packets last year. And
Well, we did
nor
print
will-
some. We
some.
did print some.
No.
Yeah.
Last year? For Zoom?
Maybe I just printed my own.
Yeah, but we didn't, like a normal in-person conference, we didn't have a lot of them printed. And nor will we this year, but that's later in the meeting.
Yeah. So yeah, we are doing more. We're spending a lot on technology and on postage right now, more than we normally do. But printing, I don't see us really going back to a printed Chinook. The information that's in the Chinook is still all there. It's just online and people can print them for their congregations if they choose to. Chinook was spendy. It was sure pretty, spendy. Okay, want to talk about 2023? This is where the big changes happen. So this cell here is the bottom line basic allocation that we'd be keeping. And then congregational generosity, this is the number of the suggested congregational offerings. You'll see that I also expect a much greater, our AIPs, a much greater percentage also, and I can predict that fairly accurately because the number, this percentage number is based on the last completed fiscal year, not necessarily on, and it's an average. It's a 5-year average. So 4 of the 5 years I already have, and for the lowest year is dropping off of the next year's average. So I anticipate this will be another $10,000 larger next time. Excuse me.
quick comment going back to the 88,500 listed under congregational generosity. If we went with that model for 2023, that averages out to about 3,000, maybe 3,050 per congregation. And we know there's lots of congregations that can't do that, but we also know we have lots of congregations that can do well over that. And so just to give you that kind of, again, just a frame of reference, if we need 88,500, the average per congregation, and I think that it would be worth sharing with them, is about $3,000 in generosity. So that gives people an idea of what we're looking at. And, you know, if every congregation was able to do that, we would easily meet that budget. And we know that some could do more. So.
Yeah. I don't have a lot of experience with health insurance shopping. Does anybody here have a lot of experience with that? No. I just decided that I would be conservative and say that health insurance costs would rise 10% from year to year. I don't really know if that's true or not. That's why the 2023 is a little, like I said earlier, is a little more woogie than 2021 is, or 2022 is.
Well, I'd suggest Kaiser Permanente, but that's totally selfish reasons.
Okay. If nobody has any more questions, Kim, I think I'm done with this portion. Stop sharing.
Okay, so again, tonight we're presenting drafts of everything, and you've all, you know, raised some great questions in terms of where we are so far with the budget, the allocation model, and I would suggest that in the next several days, if more questions come to mind, to please feel free to email the whole group so that we can address those questions. But overall, I guess I'd like to get a poll at this point on the two different issues. In general, what would be your level of support for moving to this proposed allocation model that Donald has described? You know, can I just get like a thumbs up if you are generally in support of moving to this sort of model? And I'll offer the generally unsupportive in that. And Laura, your video, oh, look at, she used a little emoji. I love that. Okay, well, good. So that's good for us to know. And thank you. We will refine that and prepare a resolution to reflect that. And then we will run that resolution by all of you before it goes out in mid-September with my President's Fall letter. We will run that resolution past you before it goes out to the general public to make sure that we've covered everything. But you guys have asked some great questions. You know, Donald and I, neither of us have accounting or finance degrees or real training. So we appreciate that you guys, many of you do, and can ask some good questions that we had not thought of. Lisa, I see your hand up, so I'm going to call on you now before I continue.
Yeah, so my question is just regarding those that are not congregations that are small groups, like Fairbanks wasn't listed on. So where is the recommendations, or is that to be determined?
I am writing that one down too, Lisa. Thank you. That's an excellent idea.
Yeah, we've got
offer them a chance to be generous as well. That's a good idea.
Yes, thank you. And the fact is, we actually have a couple of congregations right now that are considering doing what Fairbanks has done and moving from an established congregation to a new expression group. And so these would be good questions and things that we do need to think about. So thank you, Lisa, on that. So then as far as the proposed budget, again, general overall support, yes or no?
Mhm.
For what we've presented here. Okay, great. You guys
It's
are
easy to
so
pass a
easy.
budget when there's so much good news. I gotta say, some year it that won't necessarily happen, but this year everything looks great.
Yeah. Okay, Donald, you mentioned the Bend property
Oh.
that is in contract now. Did you have any other general Mission Center financial officer updates to provide?
That is a big one, so I should mention something about that. Yeah, it's a long time coming. Big housing developer, Polish Homes. They build large residential housing in many cities across our state. Current projects include Hillsborough and Bend already, and they are purchasing the entire chunk of the consortium's property, not just the churches. So they're purchasing hundreds of acres, not just our 28 acres, and they're doing it all together. And they have left a provision in place for the church to retain a small piece of that property if they choose to build upon it or enhance their current congregation there. And so they're set to close no later than June of 2023. The possibility that they could be closing earlier than that. So up to 6 months earlier is what we've been told, but they can't write that down. They gave us a drop dead date because we insisted upon date. They put it out there as far as they could. At that point, the Bend loan will be paid off. They'll likely make donations to Bridge of Hope, and the congregation, what they will plan to do with the rest of the money, and that's very much up in the air between them and Ron Harmon and Kim and I. And it's a little bit too early to figure out what they're going to do.
Zach,
And
are there
I'm very, very
contingencies on that
pleased.
sale? Do you know?
Contingencies. Can you be more specific?
Like usually in a purchase and sale agreement, you might have contingencies, like a developer like that might require city planning approval before they close on the sale, or I'm assuming that property probably doesn't have like environmental damage that has to be cleaned up before the sale goes through. But
Yeah, that's
like-
one of the beauties of having entered into the consortium in advance. All that research was done, and a lot of the pre-planning was done. So they do have, there will be some checks along the way about what piece of property we're going to be retaining and to what degree we need to pay for any of the infrastructure that's going to connect that to the rest of the development. But it will be taken out of the proceeds and not taken from the loan, because the loan's maxed out anyway. Yeah. I don't have anything else that I can think of off the top of my head right now, Kim.
Okay. Then in that case, I want to talk about Mission Center Conference briefly, and then move to some resolutions that we're anticipating proposing. The first announcement is that the Mission Center leadership team decided yesterday that we will have Mission Center Conference on the Zoom platform once again. We had very much hoped and started planning for an in-person conference, and this year, had we been able to do that, it would have been delegates only. And so only delegates would have been allowed to come to Portland. And then what we would have suggested would be to have watch parties in various congregations for non-delegates, so that they could view everything and hear the discussions and that sort of thing. But just to reduce the number of folks in the Portland gym. With the numbers of everything going right the way they are right now, and the amount of time that we need to plan an in-person conference, there's just no way we can justify even beginning that sort of planning. So we felt, and based on feedback, that the Zoom platform actually went really well last year, thanks to top-notch tech gurus like Brenda. and various others. And so, so we're going to go ahead with that platform again this year. And I have requested from Ron Harmon that we be allowed to once again use a non-delegate platform so that everyone has an opportunity to vote under the situation that we're in. Last year, we were able to go use the non-delegate platform rather than the delegate format that we normally have. In that regard, we have been talking about actually changing our operating guidelines to move permanently to a non-delegate type conference, even when we are able to come back to having conferences in person. The reasoning, being that when the Mission Center was first created, we combined, I think, 5 different jurisdictions. And we wanted to ensure that every jurisdiction had a fair number of delegates able to represent their congregations in their various different geographical areas. And we feel that at this point, our Mission Center is cohesive enough. I think we've finally kind of moved to that place where we're not constantly, comparing the former Seattle Stake with the former Southern Oregon District and the former Portland Metropole Stake or District. I think we feel like a unified body now, and we have so many people in recent years coming to conference that I think there is a fair representation. And I don't know that having a required number of delegates from each congregation is essential to moving forward the business of the Mission Center. So that would be something that we would actually not be able to present this year because it is a non-delegate conference. We would have to wait till we're back in the delegate conference and then present a resolution. So the earliest at this point that we could present a resolution to that effect would be 2022 to be effective in 2023. So if we can meet in person next year, we are considering putting forth that resolution. So it would be a while. Does that make sense? Do you understand why we can't do it this year? Because this is an exception, and so we can't have a non-delegate conference vote on moving, to a permanent change such as that. At least that was Ron's advice. So if it meets with all of your approval for us to have a non-delegate conference again this year, just nod your head or give me a thumbs up if that's sounds like it's a good plan. If not, we can certainly discuss it if there's questions.
I have a question.
Carolyn
Kim.
looks like she might have a question.
Okay.
Donald has a question.
Well, I do have a question. Like say we have a non-delegate conference. I mean, one of the nice things about doing it in Portland is we knew how many seats we could have, and we knew how many people could show up and fit into that room. You have a non-delegate conference, do we have a facility large enough to hold it if more people come?
I think what we've kind of talked about in the past is if we moved to a non-delegate conference, we would also move to a pre-registration requirement so that we knew exactly who was coming. When we've had a delegate conference in the past, we always kind of knew, we knew the delegates were coming, and we always kind of knew, well, there'll probably be like, another 15 or 20% delegates coming, mostly from the Portland, Vancouver area. If we were to move to a non-delegate conference, we would very likely move to a registration with a maximum amount if we were to stay at Portland for the conference. So a lot of things would have to be discussed, and we just right now don't have the bandwidth to really delve into that this year. And so that's why it's actually good that we can't really think about that until next year and kind of flesh out all of those variants and ramifications, I guess. Other questions? Christina?
I think a non-delegate conference works really well over Zoom because there's sort of equal access geographically to get there. I worry about the equity of a non-delegate
Mhm.
conference that's held in the Portland area because, you know, it is an overnight hotel trip for my family to go. I've actually never been to a Mission Center conference in person because I wasn't, as a young adult, wasn't able to, you know, stay in a hotel. And then after the fact, somebody would say, oh, the congregation could have helped you, but that was not ever like, that was never advertised or obvious. And so it was not accessible to me before it was on Zoom with being 2.5 hours away. So I would just think about that in terms of equity, especially if the surplus of people who were coming previously were all from the same geographic area. I think we are a more cohesive mission center than, you know, conversations that I recall when I was a kid, but I still hear comments once in a while about Southern Oregon District. So I don't think it's totally gone away. And so I think that we should be cognizant of keeping things feeling equitable, whether that's like a hybrid conference where you have I mean, I think there's a lot of ways to do that. And obviously you said you're really far away from that decision point, but I would be thinking about geographic equity and how you do that, or you rotate where it's at every couple of years or something.
Okay. Yeah, very good points. Thanks. And Brenda?
Christina mentioned the hybrid model, but I think that would probably give more access. Hybrid and then electronic voting would be able to allow multiple people to be able to participate. That was just my thought.
Yeah. And those are good, you know, that's why I think it's important to just kind of throw the idea out and get some feedback because, you know, there are aspects of this that we don't always think of. And truthfully, Christina, I don't disagree with you. I mean, I'd like to think that, you know, we could move to a non-delegate in-person conference, but I also recognize that the reality is that the vast majority of people that come are likely going to be from within an 1.5 to 2 hour radius of wherever that location is. Many mission centers have their conferences in different locations each year, and to try to balance that, I guess. I don't know that really, I think that just kind of kicks the can down the road. It doesn't really resolve the problem because then from year to year, you're going to have, you know, a greater concentration of folks from whatever geographical area that you're in. The hybrid model certainly is worth considering in that regard because some people love to come and be there in person, but others just can't for a variety of reasons. And that would give everyone equal access to having, you know, the privilege of voting. So I'm jotting that down. I think that's really worthy of discussing further. Okay, so let's see, that's where we were with conference. So again, we'll have a number of things to discuss at conference. I want to, before we run out of time, and this tags on to the budget discussion. Mission Center leadership team is going to propose a resolution given the good financial position that we've been in for the last couple of years. And yes, I love the idea of going to remote in November, because that will greatly reduce the number of people that will show up. If anyone's never been to remote, it's not accessible in November.
It totally is. I used to go there because I was friends with King King and he lived there, and I would go there all through the year. The creek is a little colder, I will say.
Or we could go to Fairbanks. Lisa would host us.
Sure.
Yeah. Actually, that would be kind of cool.
So sorry, squirrel, I got distracted. Anyway, so in talking about the budget, Donald and I, about a month ago, actually just went through all the documents that you reviewed just now and felt very strongly that the Bridge of Hope needs to be addressed regularly and consistently. And the best way to do that is to model generosity at the Mission Center level. And so given the good financial position we found ourselves in after 2 years and the anticipation that that a healthy financial base will continue for the foreseeable future, we have drafted a resolution that I will share with you, basically suggesting that our mission center, there we go. I don't know why it does that. When I'm looking at it, it doesn't. There we go. Okay, can y'all see the resolution?
Can you zoom in maybe 125%?
Can I do that? I can sure try.
It's under
I do it
your
right
view tab.
there. Oh, I only know how to do it this old fashioned way. Sorry.
Okay.
I'm a little bit old school. Y'all know I turned 60 this year.
There's a
It's the
slider on
bottom
the
right corner.
right.
Oh, this? Oh, I forget about that. I'm trying to, okay. Is that better? Nope. A
No,
little bit
it,
smaller.
No, but
In the
I'll just
Word.
put you. I'll just put you on a bigger screen. Hold on.
Okay, what happens if I do that?
Okay.
Is it better now? Because I can't see what I mean, I'm looking at the document, but I can't see.
in your Word, in the Word window, at the
Mhm.
very bottom toolbar, there's a plus and a minus sign at your bottom right of that Word document window. And you
Yes.
can make it larger there.
That's okay. I just did that. Did it get bigger for you? It's showing 130%. Am I?
You might have shared your screen, then frozen it.
You might need to reshare.
Why does it say your screen sharing is paused?
Oh, you probably clicked outside the window and that's why we can't see. If it's paused, that's why we can't see that you made it bigger. So click back into your Word document. It might unpause it for you.
I'm just gonna do stop. No, it still says it's paused and I don't know why. I'm just gonna stop sharing and share it again.
I'm
And
sorry to
hopefully
be
you can see
trouble.
it.
I'm fine now. I just put you on a bigger screen, which is why I'm not
Resolution.
looking at you guys anymore.
Okay, can you see it? Everyone can see it. Okay.
Much better. Thank you.
Thank you.
So, and I will send this out. I only finished drafting this like literally an hour before this meeting started. So I will send this out for you to read, but some of it might look familiar because I took some of these whereases from the resolution that we had 3 years ago to tithe 10% of the net proceeds from the Bellevue property sale. And so the first whereas is taken directly from President Beasley's counsel at the 2019 World Conference regarding financial constraints in the church, and that we are called to live the stewardship principles and practices. Second whereas is the basic statement that the World Church is depending on all jurisdictions to help fulfill the retirement responsibility known as Bridge of Hope. Our third whereas just is the statement about our affiliated investment pool earnings for those 2 years having yielded more than anticipated in interest income. And then the fourth, whereas simply that our mission center wishes to model good stewardship practices. And largely this is because we are asking congregations to be considering what they can generously contribute to that Bridge of Hope goal, that target of $3 million for our mission center. We felt it's important for the mission center to model that same behavior or that same generosity. So our resolved that the Greater Pacific Mission Center consider a contribution of $106,809.96, which that dollar amount to Community of Christ Bridge of Hope, representing 10% of the combined 2019-2020 interest income applied toward our operating investment fund held within Mission Center's affiliated investment pool. And be it further resolved that such contribution will be forwarded to Bridge of Hope by the end of the year. I'm going to let Donald address the resolved with the dollar amount and what that means, because he helped draft that paragraph. And I don't know that I could explain it as well as he could. I do want to just say that the reason the dollar amount particularly and the percentage are highlighted is that that's what we're starting with. And our discussion tonight can certainly, we could round it to an even number of $100,000. We could there's a number of options we could do with that dollar amount. So at this point, I think I would just entertain questions, and I need to figure out a way to see all of
Do
you.
you want me to explain the number first?
I do.
Okay, so inside of our AIP account, which the balance is over $5 million, are many, many, many jurisdictional funds. But the largest by far is our operating investment fund, which is where we take our interest and apply it to our operating budget. The other funds in there, there's Fairbanks Fund, there's the Alaska Ministry Fund, there's New Expressions, there's Caravan, a myriad number of other funds that are in the AIP. But the operating investment fund is about 93 to 94% of the entire AIP fund. And if we were to tithe off of our interest, I don't think it would be fair to all the other jurisdictional funds or designated funds to take money from them also, because that would imply we would need to get permission from a whole lot of people to say, hey, is it okay if we give 10% of your earnings to the Bridge of Hope? I think it's just a lot simpler if we say, because this is the one that affects the Mission Center budget the most, as opposed to, Fairbanks and all the others. So the 10% of what we earned in the last 2 years, that's 2019 and 2020, 10% of the operating investment fund is that number that you see there. So if you wanted to make it a different number, I don't think Kim and I really care if you want to play around with this number or the percentage, but because those funds have been making 12% annually and we've been spending 6% annually, they have been growing despite our operations. So we felt that at least over those 2 years, and you'll notice that there isn't a resolve saying and in future years, because I really think this is something that should be done year by year, depending on your financial situation. I don't think you should put it in your procedures. I feel like we can afford that. It would mean that the 2023 budget line that I saw you and told you to forget about that wouldn't be at conference, I'd have to change it slightly. It would require an additional $6,000 approximately to be taken out of our AIP fund, because that amount there, the 106, if that were taken out of that fund, accounts for the percent. If we're currently taking 5 to 6% of our interest, that would decrease that amount by $5,000 or $6,000. But I do believe that we can afford that at this time. So that's where the numbers come from.
Doug, you had a question.
Yeah, well, more of a thing that we did at our congregation. I put in the budget to give some money to Bridge of Hope for this budget cycle, and then I also challenged the congregation to match that amount with donations. And so maybe something around that. I don't know if it necessarily needs to be in the formal whatever we're approving here. I can't remember. Sorry.
In the resolution itself.
Resolution. Yeah, it doesn't need to be in the resolution itself. It just needs to be something that you could put out there maybe and challenge the
Well,
group.
I think that's a great suggestion. If you'll recall, back in 2017, Puyallup congregation challenged the rest of the Mission Center under the a time to act message that President Veazey had come out with in September of 2017, and matched. Puyallup congregation actually matched a number of generous contributions to the Bridge of Hope at that time, and it was a successful campaign. So I think that's definitely worth consideration, that even if we don't put that language in the resolution itself, at the time that we present the resolution, we could certainly present with it a challenge, either to individuals or to congregations to I don't think anyone can match $106,000, but to join in that effort.
It couldn't match the $106,000, but it could match the 10%.
Right.
of their earnings. If they
Right.
looked at it in the same way, all the congregations that have AIP accounts, hey, consider giving 10% of what you've earned last year.
And a number of congregations have
Yes.
been doing that in their budget for 2020 and for 2021. I know I've seen a couple of draft budgets already for 2021 where congregations have made generous donations. So, but that's a great point, Doug. Thanks. And you have your hand up again.
No, I don't. I didn't take it down. Sorry.
Oh, okay. Dan?
Yeah, I think the, you know, the donation or the 106,000 is great, but 10% of interest is a new concept. I mean, I know our congregation and other congregations have based a percentage off their total funds. We've used 4% of our funds as a guideline. And so I'm looking at 10% of interest as being a little less than what a lot of the congregations are already doing. I mean, if I understand it right, our operating investment funds close to $5 million.
That's true. If we use the same formula that you're doing at 4%, it would be 200,000 instead of 106,000.
Yeah. That was my first reaction, was that, yes, I think the Mission Center should give, but I think the amount is less than what I would have expected.
I would not be opposed to giving more. I was afraid that this might shock people and people would not want to give this much. So I'm
Yeah,
happy
really, we were
for that.
concerned that this number was going to be too large for you guys.
Isn't it like 3.5 million we have to give over the camp? Like, isn't that the allotment to the Mission Center from the
It's-
World Church?
So to clarify, it's
Not an
a
allotment, right,
$3
a lot.
million target. And it's not an allotment or an assessment.
Right.
It's a target that we're just striving for.
Little a
If
allotment.
we don't
not
make
big
it,
A.
we're not going to be paid for it. Yeah, yeah. If we
Um,
don't make that 3 million, we're not going to be charged 3 million. Or,
Okay,
or
3
it's not going
million.
to be taken out. It's just something that the World Church, the presiding bishopric, felt that $3 million was a reasonable target for this mission center.
Hey, Dan, can I ask you a question? Is that been 4% annually?
We've done it for three or 4 years now.
The 4%?
Yeah.
So Donald, what would 4% of our total AIP balance be?
Well, it would be about $200,000.
Okay.
But I'm not prepared to do the math at this point. If we commit to doing
Right.
it annually right now, what that long-term impact would have. I think that we could definitely absorb that in a one-time offering for sure.
One thing that's different is that the Mission Center regularly does already draw off their AIP, where I don't think the
Right.
congregations are. So
We want to take that into
Yeah,
the
we do need to
calculation.
take that into consideration because we do take a lot of that interest to support our staff and our mission. So we don't want to overextend ourselves.
Right.
Maybe, I don't know if you can do the math in this meeting, but you said that we've been using 6% and earning 12%. And I should be able to do the math on this, but 10% of the combined, like over 10% of that amount over 2 years, would it be higher if you took the delta from each year? Basically like the surplus.
It would be over those 2 years.
I'm wondering if, I mean, just sort of this is what the break even from 2019. So like donating whatever we had, the difference between whatever we had budgeted or planned on versus what's there
whatever we
now.
actually received. Right.
Yeah, rather than a percentage of the interest, because that might be something that congregations can directly relate to better as a model for thinking about it. Like, what did you earn in 2020 or 2019 and 2020 that was beyond what you expected to keep in your accounts? And congregations aren't drawing on it, like you said, but there is like a, well, we need to make sure we have, if the boiler goes out or if, whatever we have in the building,
Mhm.
then we need to make sure we always have, $200,000, but now we've got $250,000.
I agree with that in principle, but I also want to include an inflationary coefficient.
Net present value.
Yeah.
Don't take me back to engineering economics. I don't want to do that tonight.
So is there general support for this dollar amount? Or would we lobby for an increased amount or somewhere in the middle? I mean, I don't know. I don't have the calculations. Also, I don't do math. And so I rely on Donald to give me the figures as to what we can reasonably, not only what the calculations are based on our interest income, but also what we can reasonably, how we can reasonably extend ourselves without running too big of a risk. Should the economy and the market and everything just take an unexpected choom, I don't want to find ourselves in a position where we're suffering and having to cut, programs or staff.
I don't want to suggest the amount, but I think that we are in a very unique situation here, and that we should, and we should make this higher.
Okay.
I don't know what, but I do think we should
Yeah.
Okay.
make it higher.
What I'm hearing,
And as it's explained to the group,
what I'm hearing from the group is, Donald, please explore your true capacity a little bit greater and come back to us with a little bit more detail and perhaps digging deeper.
Okay.
Are you okay
I
with that,
think
Kim?
that's fair.
Okay.
Yeah. No, and this is what I'm going to say to this group, because this is, the situation with the church's financial situation has been going on for years now. We all know it. And each year I say this to the leadership team, and yet it doesn't really happen, but I'm going to say it again, and to you guys this time. I am to the point of understanding that we all are going to have to make sacrifices. The Bridge of Hope absolutely must be resolved. That goal must be met. And it's going to require sacrifices from all jurisdictions, from campgrounds to congregations to mission centers, and certainly the world church in general. And if the mission center isn't prepared to make some sacrifices, we can hardly ask the congregations to make those sacrifices. And we're to the point where we have 2.5 years to meet this goal. And the idea of just continuing to encourage generosity, that window is closing. And I think we need to step it up and start urging folks to make some really significant sacrifices. And if we're not prepared to model that at the mission center level, I don't feel that I can go to congregations and ask them to make those same kinds of sacrifices. By the same token, the mission center has a lot of expenses that we cover that congregations don't have. And so we have to balance that in some way. But I would certainly, if Donald can run the numbers and can justify 150,000 or 200,000, I don't know how comfortable I would feel going more than 200,000, simply because I don't know, what the financial picture would look like at that point. But I'm certainly willing to consider bumping up that number to a place where Donald feels we could comfortably go and still be, sacrificing in some way. So.
And Kim, just to verify, this is not an annual contribution. This is we're just one time.
And this does not prevent us from coming back next year with a similar resolution.
Right.
And that's what Donald was saying, is that for us, it would not make good financial sense to make this a perpetual or recurring contribution. It would be for this year only, and then we would be able to assess by this time next year where we are financially and if we can do another contribution in that way.
Yeah, and for that reason that we talked about earlier, basically is because we take a draw off of our investments every year to sustain our budget on a year when we have a loss, it doesn't make sense to me to take an additional 4% on years like that. That would be too much risk for me to stomach.
So what I think I'm hearing, and I see there's a bunch of chats in there. I don't do well with looking at chats when I'm trying to talk. So if there's anything in there that needs to be expressed before we move on, feel free to jump in and speak those chats aloud. But what I'm sensing as the consensus here is that we will explore how much more we can contribute with some justification and then come back to you with another number. That seemed to be what I'm hearing. Any
Yep.
objections to that?
Nope.
Okay, good. I will stop sharing my screen then. And absolutely, as always, if something occurs to you tonight or tomorrow or the next day or next week, please shoot those questions out, whether to Donald and I or to the whole group is your preference. But if you have any other ideas or thoughts or even wording or language that might be appropriate for coming up with a higher number, feel free to shoot those to us so that we can give that some consideration as well. I don't propose to be the best resolution writer in the world, and I know many of you have experience with that, so I am happy to take your suggestions for how to best word this so that the conference body will not only understand it, but support it. And that's the ultimate goal, is that we can move forward with proposals and resolutions and a budget that is understandable and that we can explain in very simple terms, simple just being not too complex, to the body so that we can gain support and not have to spend an inordinate amount of time at Mission Center Conference trying to explain formulas and how we arrived at calculations and whatnot.
I think whatever we end up, that number ends up being, Brenda had suggested $150,000 with a, just straight up one-to-one match for congregations. And I like the idea of drafting a resolution that way because it's
Is
the
that in
dollar
the
amount
chat
is,
box?
yeah, it's in the chat. The dollar,
Okay.
and it may not be 150,000. That's really that true capacity, but making it a nice, clean, even number. And then you can explain in the resolution, even in the whereases, like whereas this amount is what we have extra, then you make a nice clean number and the be it resolved clauses, and then a clear match for the congregations. I think it's simple and succinct and easy for people to understand. And I'm always happy to help draft resolutions because I draft them weekly or review them weekly anyway. So
Well, fantastic.
I'll volunteer there. And sometimes with a lot more money than this. So that's kind of fun.
I am copying and pasting that suggestion into a place where I can come back and look at it.
Would that mean that if the congregations don't match the 150,000, then we don't give full 150,000?
I think it's a challenge and not a contingency.
Okay.
And then I think you could think about how to put it out on social media or updates to congregational bulletins of like, where are we at? And a timeline, like if it's not the end of the calendar year, is it by, the end of the first quarter or something that, is a challenge.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah, we're getting into the weeds now here too, because we have a lot of individuals who donate to the Bridge of Hope through the Mission Center too. And they'd be like, can we count those towards our congregation? And I can just see my head exploding here.
If you make it a short time, then you just count like we want to raise from members or congregational donations another 150,000. So you just take whatever people are already giving plus the increase and you don't overcomplicate it, I think. So those people don't have to, I know it's like, it's so wonky now because I want to like donate to Bridge of Hope, but I have to do it in like, like I can't do it on e-tithing because then it doesn't go. So
Right.
it's like, it's not your fault, Donald, but it's already so complicated. Like we shouldn't my opinion is should not overcomplicate it
It
anymore.
is. It's already a very complicated process, and it's very frustrating for me to, have recently learned that we've got some members in the Mission Center who have been contributing enormous amounts of money to Bridge of Hope directly, and so it hasn't been credited to our $3 million target, which is very disappointing to me. But it's still good. It's still going to Bridge of Hope, and that's the important thing. And just have to, look at the big picture. So
He did do what Charlie Warrenberg does when I accidentally tithe in the wrong way. He like pulls me aside after church and is like, I've noticed that you're tithing to this account, and I don't think that's what you mean to do. So can you change? You might want to change it.
Yes.
It's like super helpful.
Well, if we could only do that with everyone. But yeah, so I think what I'm hearing then is that we will revamp this resolution to use a different model, a different formula with a higher contribution, and do some reworking. Christina, I will happily engage you or anyone else that wants to be involved in that rewriting process. And I'll circle back to you in an email later, and we will try to have that out within the next couple of weeks minimum, just because we want to have this ready to go by the middle of September. Okay, fair enough. Excellent questions. Thank you. The last thing I have is just a reminder. So you are all aware that we will be also opening up World Conference resolutions this year again, because World Conference got postponed a year. So you will recall that last year we had a resolution on mob violence and rioting that was tabled. And so Christina, as our resident parliamentarian here, we wanted to confirm that when a motion has been tabled, or a resolution has been tabled the way that one was, does that mean that I am obligated as Mission Center, as chairman of the meeting, to bring that back to the body? Or would perhaps the person who wrote it who brought it be the one obliged to present it to the conference again? And I'm putting you on the spot, I know.
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that off the top of my head. And I'm actually using my work computer, which has the wrong Robert's Rules of Order, because the city hasn't changed the version since the 1960s. So I would want to check it against modern version. Email me the minutes and I can answer that question.
Okay. Yeah, you and I can
it
work
might
offline.
matter how it was laid on the table. And
Yeah.
so I would want to make sure to
Yeah, so just an FYI for everyone that that resolution may or may not come back up, but we do have to again open up the opportunity for anyone to bring a World Conference resolution to this conference this year again. And the things that we have learned post-conference last year are that we've got a couple of folks who are on the resolutions committee for World Conference who have indicated that they would be happy to review any resolutions prior to our conference to give advice as to whether the resolutions committee would even consider it. And it may end up saving a lot of time. So that resolution in particular might go through that process.
It may be that the motion died because we didn't meet again, because we only meet annually. So I would generally, if a motion is tabled and then your session ends, then it can just kind of die on the table and someone could reintroduce it as but either way, there's a way to bring it back. Like it doesn't mean you're barred.
And I don't know that Scott Amos will do that. there were a lot of discussions following conference last year about rewriting it with the help of some others in the Mission Center and possibly having a special Mission Center conference to reintroduce it or to revise it. And they never requested doing that, so they may have just decided to let it die. So that part's unknown, but just so you are aware that if you know of anyone who is considering a World Conference resolution, we actually will be considering them again this year. And that was my last thing to talk about. So, all right, is there anything out there for any of you that you feel the body here needs to discuss or consider before we close?
I'm good.
Thank you. Okay, well, if not, I will just again extend my deep gratitude for your input and helping Donald and I navigate all of this again. And it really is very valuable. You guys all come from a variety of areas of expertise and background and knowledge. And so it's really helpful for us to be able to tap into all of that and help us move through the business of the Mission Center. And with that, I have asked Carolyn if she would close us with a blessing this evening. And following that, we'll say good night until next time.
Loving God, thank you for the opportunity to gather together as servants, as people who care deeply about this Mission Center, our congregations, the people in it. Continue to open our hearts to the idea of giving to our true capacity. Financially, yes, but in our faith, in our joy, in our laughter, in our time. Thank you for the tremendous work that has clearly gone into all the documents and resolutions that we were able to review together and muddle through and bounce ideas off of. Thank you for the spirit of collaboration and friendship here tonight. As we move forward, it is my prayer that that collaboration continue, that our hearts be led to give to your people, to your church, to your congregations, to all of your children. I also ask a special blessing for Doug as he embarks on a new and exciting chapter in his life. Bless him and his family as he goes forward from this place into a beautiful future. Thank you for everyone here. Thank you for your presence. May it continue throughout today, tomorrow, and the rest of our lives. I ask these things in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you, Carolyn. Thank you,
Thank you.
everyone. We will circle back via email with the various things we've talked about. And if it starts looking like there's a lot to be discussed, we may just try to grab a 30-minute window of your time and come back together this way, just if it looks like that might be the easiest way to resolve or to finalize and wrap up this stuff. So, okay. All right. Thank you all. Take care.
Night.
Appreciate you.
Bye.
Right.